Hi everyone. I hope that you had a great first week at school. Don't forget that this Sunday, youth group is starting on the basketball court at 5 p.m. Don't forget to bring your mask. We are so excited to see you guys in person again. So today we're going to finish up our series on Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Let's listen to hear what Jesus has to say about building our life on a solid foundation.
Hi, I'm Emma and I'm a sophomore at Wimberley High School, and I'm here to do the scripture, which is Matthew chapter 7, 24 through 29. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house. Yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell with a great crash. When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, because he taught as one who had authority and not as the teachers of the law. Thank you. Have an awesome day.
Now, I don't know much about building things or even how sturdy a foundation needs to be for something to be built on it and actually stand tall. So I figured I would bring in an expert. All the way from Lubbock, Texas, my dad. He's a structural engineer, so he knows all the smart stuff about how to build a solid foundation for a building. So I'm gonna let him tell you about it.
As a structural engineer, I am asked to design buildings to make them stand up from wind loads or earthquakes, and from just the weight of the material that make the building components, so that they don't fall down on top of our heads. As part of that design, we have to design a foundation underneath the building so that with all that weight of all the building materials and the weight of people inside the building or furniture or something like that, we have to design the foundation so that the building doesn't sink or settle. You hear the word settlement in our industry. And so you have to design a strong, firm foundation so that the building doesn't excessively settle down into the ground or settle more on one side of the building than on the other, because then the material in the building will crack and break, and things like that. So that is the importance of designing a solid foundation underneath a structure, so that it will stand up when the wind blows. It will remain standing during an earthquake. It will stand up when there's a lot of snow on the roof, or things like that, and not excessively settle down into the ground, that could cause cracks in the building.
So I don't know if you understood all of those smart words, but let's hear what Jesus has to say about it. Jesus tells us about two houses. Both houses are similar in construction, and both houses must withstand storms. But each house has a different material upon which its foundation is laid, and each house has a different outcome. One house is built by a wise man who builds this house upon a rock. The other is built by a foolish man who builds this house upon the sand, and it collapses. Both houses appear similar to each other. Nothing that Jesus says suggests any difference in the way they look on the outside. So the immediate context of that verse would suggest that on the outside, they look very similar. Now, this reminds me of some of Jesus's earlier points in his message, where he makes a distinction between the self-righteousness of the Pharisees and the true righteousness of those who humbly follow God. Most of the distinctions that Jesus talks about haven't been things that would be outwardly noticeable at first glance. Remember murder and anger? How can you outwardly see that someone has refrained from anger or refrained from being angry at somebody? What outward difference is there on a person who limits themselves to just revenge and those who seek no revenge? How can you determine at a glance what someone treasures in their heart? While there may be some outward indicators of what's in a person's heart, they're not always easily visible. Jesus says here that 2 men built houses. One was wise, the other foolish, but you couldn't tell them apart by their outward structure. You could tell the difference when the storms came, because it's at that point that the foundation was tested. Now this is the second similarity. Both houses would have to endure the elements and be tested by the storms. Storms will come. There's no stopping them. Sometimes storms come with warning, and at other times they come suddenly without warning. But storms will come. And when the storm does come, it will test what is hidden from view. One house stands while the other collapses. Now, I would assume the builder of the second house didn't expect his house to fall into ruin. No one builds with the expectation that the structure will fall. Yet, as the storms come, many find what they have built is falling down around them. The difference between the wise and the foolish man is what they would do in response to words we have spent the last month studying. The result of the wise man's response is a strong house that withstands the storms of life. This is the response of entering the narrow gate and walking the narrow path and finding life. The result of the foolish man's response is a house that falls with a great fall. It's the response of entering the broad gate, walking the wide road that concludes in destruction. The rock the wise man builds upon is true righteousness, found in Jesus Christ alone. The sand the foolish man builds upon is self-righteousness. I don't know what storms you will find yourself in, but the storms will come. They always do. And when they do, I pray you have built your life on a solid foundation of Jesus Christ. For when the rain came, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock.